Hello, abnormals, and welcome to the Ministry of Abnormality. I am your host, O Abnormal. Today we're going to be talking about perspective, and perspective is one of my favorite things to draw. It's one of my favorite topics. It's been my passion since I started to draw in high school. A lot of artists struggle with perspective, and my objective with this series of tutorial is to make perspective easy. Because it actually is. Perspective is very simple and very easy. And I just feel that we get too complicated. We make it too complex, and then, well, of course, we don't get it. So my idea is to break down those barriers and make it really, really simple. And we're going to take it step by step. Perspective is an optical illusion. We're not actually drawing what we see. We're simulating what we see in the drawing. And so, in order to do that better, in today's video, I'm going to attempt to explain the basic concepts of how perspective works. Like I said, we're not going to be doing a perspective today. We're going to simply look at the concepts of perspective. I do hope you enjoy this video, and well, let's get to it. Now, the first concept we want to get into our heads when it comes to perspective is the concept of distance and the horizon line. Perspective is an optical illusion. It's not real. We're simulating what we see, but we can't actually draw the way we see. Because of our eyes, we have a field of view that, well, it's not quite 180 degrees, but it's close. We see a wide angle. We see curved towards the edges of our eyesight. Naturally, when we are drawing on paper, well, it's not the same. A person is looking at a piece of paper and, well, it's flat. We can simulate as much as we want, but when we're making a drawing, we're basically simulating. Our real sight is something more like this. Now, you've probably seen that in movie theaters or stuff like that, but the thing is, when we're drawing, we're not really dealing with that. So we are simulating. We are trying to get as close as possible to the sensation of how we see. Now consider this little man here standing on the globe. Well, how far can you see? The truth is that we can see very, very far. But since our planet is round, our line of sight eventually meets where the curvature of the Earth will no longer allow us to see. Of course, if something were here that is taller than the horizon line, well, actually, that's going to be like this, then we'd still be able to see it over the horizon. But as far as perspective is concerned, the horizon line is as far as we can perceive perspective. This is the horizon line. Now, how far away is it? I don't really know. I've read that it's 5 kilometers away. In other texts, I've read that it's even shorter. What is the exact number? I don't know, but I do know that it is a lot closer than you think. We can see way, way further than that, but as far as the curvature of the Earth allows us to perceive perspective, that's the horizon line. Now, imagine, if you will, that this is what we see. The green is the ground, the blue is the sky, and the black line in the middle is the horizon line. This is more or less how we would see things. Now, the important thing to keep in mind is that the horizon line is always the height of your eyes, or the camera, depending on how you look at it. When we draw, we are simulating what we see. And we can't do it exactly because of what I said before. We can't draw in the same way that we see. So it helps to imagine that we're looking through a window. The image that we see would be what we see through the window. Basically, in a frame, because, we have a flat screen or a piece of paper. Imagine the screen or the paper as if it were a window. This also helps a lot with exercises of visualization, because a very common mistake that artists make is that they only draw as if they were decorating a flat sheet of paper. If you're designing scenery, it helps a lot to imagine that there is a whole world through that window, which is your screen now. In perspective, the horizon line will always be the eye level, the height of your eyes. Right there. Now this can also be if you're looking through a camera. It's the same thing. The height of the camera is the horizon line. You can move it as much as you want, but your field of view will always move along with it. An easier way to imagine it is to imagine that what we're seeing on the right side is, what we end up seeing. The whole scenery. Green is the ground, blue is the sky, the line in the middle is the horizon line. Now, if we take the view from the left and we move it up, what we're going to see on the right is this. See how it goes with the horizon line? Now, I can also move it with this grid to kind of get a little bit more of a feeling for how the perspective would move. If we were to take the field of view down, if we were to take our horizon line down, then the same thing would happen in the image that we see. Like that. As you can see, we always move our field of view along with us, with our eye level. Now imagine that we're looking at these two floating boxes, and the horizon line is right there in the middle. Here comes the next important aspect or concept of horizon lines and perspective. Whatever is above the horizon line, I am looking at it from below. And whatever is beneath the horizon line, I am looking at it from above. Now, this may sound a little bit entangled, but it's easier to understand if we look at the image on the right. So, as you can see here, we have our horizon line. And this box is above the horizon line. And you can see here that we're seeing it as if we were beneath it. This other box is below the horizon line. And as you can see here, we're seeing it as if we were above it. Now, when we move the height of our camera, or simply our eyes, the world does not move with us. Our field of view does, but the world does not. So when we move, for example like that, the boxes will stay exactly where they are. In this case, we can see that if we were to move the horizon line with the camera, we won't be seeing the boxes that way anymore. Because, well, now they're both beneath the horizon line. That means that I'm looking at them from above. So now what we would see is this. If we were to do the opposite, if we were to move down, well, now both our boxes are above the horizon line, which means that we are beneath them. And now we see them that way. Now this is a very, very important concept of the horizon line. So it's very simple. Whatever is above the horizon line, I am beneath it. Whatever is below the horizon line, I am above it. That might explain the horizon line, but it doesn't explain why things that are further away we see smaller, and things that are closer we see larger. Now, this is by no means a scientific explanation of the whole thing. I'm not explaining the physics or anything like that, but I'm trying to get the idea into your head. So, let's see. So it's easily understood that when we look at something, when we are viewing something, we're actually seeing that in our mind. The whole visual information, light, goes in through our eyes, gets fed into our brain, and our brain projects an image for us. So inside our minds, we see an image. Now, that image, let's just say for the sake of argument that that image has a size. Our view, what we see in our minds, has a size. Now imagine that what we're seeing right here is, well, this green background with an orange dot. It occupies our entire field of view, and we see it in our brains. So in our brains, we are seeing that green background with an orange dot. What if we were to look further away? What if we were to look in the distance? Now, in the distance, well, let's just say that we're seeing the same thing, but now we are also seeing a lot of other stuff because our field of view, as you can see represented here in this cone, well, we're seeing a lot more. Now, what happens in what we see inside our minds? Well, we don't see a larger image inside our minds. That's really not how it works. Inside our minds, we are going to see exactly the same image, as in the same size. So in our minds, we don't see a larger image, we see the same size of image, except with more information in it. So instead of seeing this much larger image inside our minds, we see this. The same size of image inside our minds with more information in it. Therefore, we see stuff smaller. Now again, this is not a scientific explanation of why things in the distance are smaller than when they are closer. I'm sure that optical physics and all that kind of stuff has a much better explanation, but hopefully this will make us understand the concept of things further away being smaller. So, okay, now we know that as things are further away in the distance, we're going to see them smaller, and that the horizon line is as far as we can see. So what happens if I'm looking at two parallel lines on the floor? Like, let's say a railroad track or something like that. Well, I wouldn't see them this way because we know that in the distance I'm going to see them smaller. So I would rather see them this way, right? The distance between them as they go further away from me would get smaller. The vanishing point is where two parallel lines will meet in the distance, and they will always meet at the horizon line, which is as far as I can see, or better said, the horizon line is as far as I can perceive perspective. Now, of course, there's more than one way to see a parallel line. For example, if we were to have, well, a simple square, these two lines are parallel, and these two lines are parallel. And if we were to have a cube, then these lines are parallel, but these lines are also parallel. So what are we talking about here when we say that parallel lines will meet in the distance? Now, allow me to take you back to the most basic of the basics. One dimension is a dot. Two dimensions is when two dots connect and form a line, allowing us to have two-dimensional shapes. Three-dimension in drawing is when we start simulating. So we add depth to the whole situation so that we can simulate depth. Now, an easier way, or a better way to represent this would be the Cartesian coordinates. You might have seen this in high school. I hope you don't hate it by now. But yes, we had the axis where we saw that y was the vertical axis, x was the horizontal axis, and z represented depth. So, we would get our coordinates for each one, and that way we could make three-dimensional shapes. Now imagine that this is a box. If we have a box, you can see that each one of the lines of the box is Well, you can see it on the Cartesian coordinate plane. You can see that all the verticals are the y-axis, and all the horizontals are the x-axis, and all the lines of depth are the z-axis. You can also see them here by color. So it should be easy to understand that all the blue lines, the ones that correspond to the y-axis, they're parallel to each other. And all the green lines are parallel to each other, and all the red lines are parallel to each other. So here we start talking about one-point perspective. In one-point perspective, only the z lines go to the horizon. The y and the x lines stay the same. The z lines are projected to the horizon. If we talk about two-point perspective, we would project the z and the x lines, and the y lines always stay vertical. And when we talk about three-point perspective, we project all the lines to a vanishing point. Different vanishing points, of course. But let's focus on one-point perspective for now. So as you can see here, the red lines that we are projecting into the horizon would be lines that correspond to the z-axis. We can see it better here when we add a box. Now, imagine that, like we said before, we're looking at the world through a window frame. As you can see, we have that these are the lines that correspond to the x-axis, and these are the lines that correspond to the y-axis, and these are the lines that correspond to the z-axis. And as you can see, only the z lines go to the horizon. An easier way to imagine it is if we were to put these colors on the frame. As you can see, the vertical lines of the frame are blue and the horizontals are green. Now look at the boxes. As you can see, some of the box's lines are parallel to the green line in the frame, and some of them are parallel to the blue lines. Only the red lines, which are on the z-axis, get projected to the vanishing point on the horizon line. My objective with today's tutorial, which hopefully was short, simple, and basic, was to explain all the concepts, well, not all, but the fundamental concepts behind drawing perspective and what we're actually doing when we draw perspective. In our next tutorial, we will be drawing a one-point perspective, so we're actually going to start construction and such. But until then, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please leave a like or subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to support what I do and maybe help me make more videos in the future, check out my Patreon. The address is like right there, I think. Yeah. Check it out. Maybe you can support my work and help me make more videos in the future, or help me make them better. Also, if you have any advice on how I can make them better, well, be sure to let me know. You can find me anywhere you want on the internet as OAbnormal. That includes all the social media and all that kind of stuff. So for now, thank you. You have been watching the Ministry of Abnormality, and I have been your host, OAbnormal. I'll see you next time. Stay naughty. Goodbye.